Hello and welcome to the Political Sphere, the show focusing on the biggest stories in politics in the last week. I'm Lawrence Jeffcoat and here are the biggest political stories from the past week. Starting in Australian political news, journalistic freedoms could be put at risk due to the passing of new encryption laws, which would allow government security agencies to intercept the messages of terrorists. However, concern has been raised over a lack of express protection to journalists who use similar applications to communicate securely with anonymous sources and whistleblowers. The opposition had promised to amend the legislation. However, a deal was later struck to pass the legislation so long as amendments could be made in the new year. The opposition justified their actions along government accusations that inaction could be putting national security at risk. In the week that passed, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison also announced that his party would be increasing the barriers to which would allow an incumbent Prime Minister to be removed by a leadership spill. Mr Morrison was made the new party leader and thus Prime Minister after the Liberal Party voted out then incumbent Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. The changes include the new rule of the party not voting out an elected Prime Minister, with the only exemption in place being a special majority vote of a two-third majority in the party room to overturn this rule. However, the Prime Minister stated during a press conference that the rule would not apply to a Liberal opposition leader. And taking a look at US political news now. The US this week said goodbye to their 41st President George H.W. Bush, who passed away at the age of 94. President Bush served one term as president from 1989 to 1993, and also served as vice president for Ronald Reagan from 1981 to 1989. President Bush's resume also included being appointed ambassador to the United Nations and director of the CIA. A large outpouring of condolences occurred, including statements from the UN and President Trump. The world also shared images of the former president's service dog, which was sitting by his casket. The Bush family, along with the casket of the former president, flew on Air Force One, which was renamed to Special Mission 41 to Washington, where President Bush's casket lied in state. Later in the week, a state funeral occurred at the National Cathedral in DC, where many analysed the body language between former and current presidents. And on Thursday, President Bush was laid to rest in College Station, Texas, at his presidential library. And lastly, in US political news this week, we saw updates to the Mueller investigation through prosecutors' recommendations on sentences for former Trump associates. These included former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, which was given a recommendation that he have no prison time due to, quote, substantial assistance to the investigation. Also included was former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen, which was recommended that he should receive substantial prison time despite his cooperation. Documents also revealed former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort testified twice before a grand jury and met with the special counsel on 12 separate occasions, with Mr. Manafort being accused of telling multiple lies, thus violating his agreement. A transcript of an interview between former FBI Director James Comey and the House Judiciary Committee also revealed the investigation initially focused on 4 Americans and their potential connections to Russian interference. These Americans were not identified, but Mr. Comey clarified President Trump was not one of the 4. To add upon this Trump-related news, it was also revealed on Saturday that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly would be leaving his role at the end of the year. Kelly had previously served as the Secretary of Homeland Security and took over after Reince Priebus left the position as White House Chief of Staff. Nick Ayers, the current Chief of Staff for Vice President Mike Pence, is currently the frontrunner in media analysis to take on the position of White House Chief of Staff. And lastly, taking a look at international political news, France was rocked this week by demonstrations by a group calling themselves the Yellow Vests. The group was protesting the rising costs of fuel, which has been made worse by a government tax which was implemented by the Macron government. The group has protested throughout the streets of Paris, calling for the resignation of Macron and vandalism of national monuments such as the Arc de Triomphe occurring. The protesters did receive their desired outcome with the fuel tax being suspended, although protests have still been occurring, with similar protests even occurring in neighbouring Belgium. However, in the wake of these protests, the question still stands: what are these people protesting more, the fuel prices or the Macron government? External sources can be seen in the description, along with the sources I used in the description below. Be sure to like the video and comment what you thought about the past week in the political sphere. This week's episode has been slightly shorter as I am travelling this week, and also does not include any video, which I hope to add in soon. So stick around and be sure to tune in next week.